From the heart of Worcester County on Maryland's coast, I'm Commissioner Chip Bertino, and you're plugged into the Conduit Street Podcast, the place to learn about the policies affecting local government in Maryland.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. This is Karrington Anderson from the Mako Policy Team, and today I'm joined by my colleague, Sarah Sample. Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love an opportunity for us to take over from the bosses and give it the associate policy team member spin.
Yes, absolutely. Might just take it over for them. Just kidding. Don't want that role, and they do a very good job. So let's get it.
What you wish for there.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah, somewhere Michael was just like, "Oh yeah, that sounds great."
Yeah, taking notes. Well, okay, let's get into it. So I understand today we're going to be hearing from you about all of the wonderful world of public information requests.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Public Information Act requests, sort of the processes there, review standards, the ombudsman's role, the board's role. I mean, there's a lot to unpack here, but really just how the request and the fulfillment process is being affected by technology and what some of those changes are that we're seeing.
Okay. So what was it that triggered you to focus on this right now? I mean, obviously leading into the legislative session, we're really starting to dial in on what topics are taking up a lot of air and oxygen for us. So why do the deep dive on the Public Information Act process, and tell us why we care right now?
So the Compliance Board, the Public Information Access Compliance Board, it's a mouthful. It holds a few meetings every year. I believe it's 3. And part of those meetings is to discuss how the request system that has been established is working. Sort of, is it working? What's becoming easier? What has become more difficult? And are there changes that could or should be made? So I was watching the second to last meeting with the board, and it included the Public Access Ombudsman and some of her staff to just sort of talk about how the last year has gone in terms of their role. And she brought up a number of things that were challenges and creating problems for the process and for custodians. Like she threw out body-worn camera requests from, the cameras that the officers are wearing. And she brought up very broad email requests and things related to cybersecurity. And she noted these as very regular and very significant problems. And then in the subsequent, after her presentation, and then in the subsequent meeting, the board had made some recommendations and voted on those recommendations as far as legislative changes to the PIA. And what struck me was this sort of lack of connection between what the board voted to recommend and what the ombudsman had shared with them. It was sort of like those two things just missed each other in terms of being able to come together to create some recommendations that could respond to some of these technological changes. And I think some of the things that the Public Access Ombudsman brought up sort of potentially signaled the need to narrow or add guardrails to the PIA. And so, yeah, I think that the fact that those two things didn't really line up in terms of what the recommendations were was, I think, surprising. But also shows that there might be a lack of congruence when it comes to the board and the ombudsman and just the general climate around PIA stuff. So I think it's interesting that these things are coming up and recommendations are being made, and that maybe there's potential for some sort of a stakeholder group coming together to really sort of dive into what some of the nuts and bolts are of the real challenges, and how recommendations could go to the General Assembly to hopefully deal with those.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we dive into some of those details that you just mentioned, can you frame for our audience a little bit of the structure of the PIA process? And you also mentioned a board and an ombudsman just now. What's the process that would involve either of them?
Yeah. So let me back it up, because I'm talking about a lot of things that haven't really grounded here yet. So we have a Public Information Act information request process, and that means that you could send a request to a county agency. looking for a particular record related to, anything really, permitting, land use, public safety. And then that custodian who works for the county has 30 days to respond, typically. If either the custodian or the person requesting the information feels as though one party didn't fulfill their responsibility or obligation, they can go to the Public Access Ombudsman, who can essentially mediate for them. And that's Lisa Kirshner, who was the one giving the update at the board meeting. And what Lisa can do is she can talk to both parties and try to figure out where the points of tension are, and then advise them on things that they can do to get everybody more or less on the same page. And sometimes that would be that the requester would have to maybe narrow the scope of their search because they were asking for something that was really broad, or they might ask for the individual to be more specific. And then other times it could be for the custodian. It could be that you have to lower the fee that you are charging the requester, or you have to like search a different type of file other than the ones that you did. So she can sort of just work out the kinks there. But if that mediation process does not resolve the issues, then it can go to the Public Information Act Compliance Board. And that's the 5-member board that reviews these kinds of inquiries. And you can see on the Compliance Board's website all of the decisions that they have made throughout the year. You can actually go through and review them all. I love going through and seeing, what they weigh in on and what direction it goes. Someone made fun of me recently because they were like, that is the nerdiest thing I have ever heard. And I'm
yeah,
like,
but that sounds about right.
yeah, I know, right? But yeah, so that's sort of like the framework of what we're dealing with.
Yeah. So that process that you just outlined, the one that we have in Maryland, do you think that works well?
Yeah, I think so. I would say the ombudsman process is useful because it does keep things from going to the full board and tying up their sort of docket. And then it also keeps things from going to the courts and creating more of a backlog there than already exists. So that process does sort of act as a stopgap, so that you don't have this big bottleneck that's happening further up the chain. But what I will say is there was a big bottleneck up until last year because the Public Access Ombudsman, Lisa Kirshner, she was an office of one for a while, and it is required that something comes to her before it goes to the board. So you can't skip that part of the process if you're trying to contest something, either as a requester or a custodian. And so until last year, it was that she was the only one that had the authority to do the work in her office. But Senator Augustine and Delegate White Holland passed a bill that basically gave her the ability to delegate some of her authority to another mediator in her office. And then the AG, because the AG's office is the one who sort of is the office she works out of, but also she has an assistant AG for her team. But they handle sort of the staffing for her division. And they were able to bring on her additional staff member within their existing budget. So I think with that, they have been really able to work through their backlog, start up more of the educational processes that they also have been sort of charged with doing. Like, and a good example is they do a brown bag lunch series, which is about, just educating the public and custodians on the PIA process, how it's changing. Technology is going to be a big topic for those educational sessions this year. So now that they have sort of caught up because they've worked out a few kinks in terms of the office, now they're able to expand the scope of their work to be educational, which is great because that just helps build the trust and sort of the integrity and the credibility around the process, which is really what you need when it comes to the Public Information Act and access to the information. So I think it's that's a long-winded way of saying that it's the recent changes have really, I think, given it the ability to function in the best way possible.
Right. And thinking about that office just being an office of one person, that is overwhelming. So I'm glad that they made those changes.
Yeah. I mean, I was so happy to hear that. You can see that there's so much relief on the team that does that work too. Like Kirshner, just as she was describing, the number of things that they were able to get through, and it's just you can see that it's making it so that they can really do the good job that they know how to do because they've sort of restructured it in a way that it allows them to do that. They've been set up to succeed, I would say.
Good. Yeah, that's good progress there. So going back to, you mentioned the meeting or the board meeting. So after that annual meeting, what were some of the recommendations that came out of the PIA compliance board vote?
So what did they end up doing? So of the 3 recommendations they made, 2 were focusing on clarifications for the legal requirements of a PIA request, and a 3rd recommendation was to expand the scope of the oversight allowed by the board. So like to unpack the legal requirements, one recommendation is to expand the current definition of a public record to include not just documents made or received by a government unit, but also records made or received by agents of a government unit. And the instance that they described that was sort of giving rise to this recommendation concerned documents created by and transferred between outside, like let's say outside counsel and like the insurance carrier of a local government. So since those documents were not made or received directly by the local government, they wouldn't necessarily be caught. It's like a loophole. So they wouldn't be caught by the PIA in terms of being required to be released. So it's really just clarifying, what's required to be released in those instances, because it's still a public document. It's just being transferred between 2 entities that work on behalf of the local government rather than specifically the local government. And then the other recommendation that focused on clarifications was an update to the PIA that was consistent with how data handling has evolved since the PIA was established. And so the change specifically adds language to the statute that says if the database that holds the information is capable of extracting the data that has been requested, then that doesn't count as creating a new document. So this is just like an attempt to clarify what constitutes the creation of a new record and delineate that simply from pulling a report from a database, because you don't have to fulfill a certain request if it would necessitate that government entity creating an entirely separate document that just right now doesn't exist. So that's just another clarification. And then the last recommendation is the one related to the scope of authority for the compliance board. And this has been a recommendation before. And the intent is ultimately to expand the board's oversight to include authority to review the custodian's denial of a request for a fee waiver. Right now they can assess whether the cost is too high and direct you to bring it down, or tell the requester that it's not too high. But it doesn't let them weigh in on whether or not the denial of a waiver request was appropriate. So they would be looking for that.
Is that anything that addresses what the ombudsman brought up?
I don't think so, because most of what she was talking about was really technological changes. She talked a lot about like how difficult it is to do body-worn camera searches, how difficult it is to do email searches, some of the cybersecurity threats and issues they're running into. So I wouldn't say it necessarily connected.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So walk us through some of the changes that are on your radar that are coming about due to advances in technology. You touched on how this is going to be a big issue. So is a lot of this AI driven or just impacts from a broad use of technology? What's driving some of this?
So I think there was obviously a shift towards a lot more information being stored, in someone's email, certain servers, various cloud databases. But obviously that started like in the early 2000s. And so, but there's advancements that have happened that I think have driven even more of that previously, like paper document stuff, into the virtual space. And so we were already sort of tracking in that direction for a lot of stuff to be virtual documents and a ton of them. And then I think COVID was just this big accelerant to that, which is why I think we're seeing some of the challenges now that I'm going to walk through, because it wasn't just about emails, at that point being online. These now were meetings are online. These recordings of the meetings are online. The secure transferring of documents that are, in the virtual space is happening more and more. So I think COVID really sort of like lit the fire like heavy when it came to this. And then you add AI to that and the way that, technology is changing from that standpoint, it's kind of like a whole new world in a way.
Right. That makes it probably really clear how policy and just law hasn't caught up with all of the technological changes yet.
Yeah. And I think we're still learning some of that too.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty new. At least feels that way. So yeah, walk us through some of those examples of how maybe specifically how technology is complicating the PIA process. And let's start with the request process. You've mentioned to me that there are ways to automate the PIA request. Unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. So, all right. So how information is requested has changed in a couple of ways, because now there are programs where you have the ability to go in and set up a prompt that will automate the sending of a PIA request based on a particular topic that you give it. So this has the potential to increase the number of requests that come in, particularly a broad request, and then also the frequency at which they come in. And one of the sort of supposed benefits of these programs is that you could submit a request anonymously. And right now, which is fascinating, because right now there's sort of this debate about whether or not an anonymous request is a legitimate request and would need to follow that 30-day standard and be fulfilled. And then, you can go even further in that direction of whether or not an anonymous request is one that has to be fulfilled if it's coming from like an AI robot. So basically, like if you put the prompt in, you want the AI program to send these requests in based on topics that you're interested in. If that is like, an AI program that is learning and then starting to make their own assessments about what kind of request this individual would want to put in, then at that point, it's not just an anonymous person who's putting a request through a bot. Now you've got this question about whether or not a request from a machine is a legitimate request. So,
how do they deal with that, with those requests?
I know that most of our agencies are, from the ones that have brought this up, is that they are fulfilling the anonymous ones, but I think there's this question about whether or not, because of the frequency at which they're coming in, I think there's a question about whether or not it is an actual person behind it. So as of right now, they are fulfilling them, but I think it's becoming more of a question because of the frequency. And I think that too, like there was the volume and capacity issue is something that came up from the bill that the Attorney General brought last year, because they were trying to add that another term to what types of requests would not need to be fulfilled. So like if a request is frivolous, vexatious, or in bad faith, and it's not something that you have to send. But they were trying to add abusive to that, and the frequency or redundancy of certain requests could fall under abusive. And so that question from last year would and should likely come up again if we're going to continue to see these automated and anonymous coming in. So, but yeah, I think that's what I'm saying in terms of not really sure like what the black and white answer is on it, is because it's one of those things that's new and evolving right now. We just don't have all the answers yet.
Is there any insight on how the Ombudsman and Compliance Board can help with some of this, or is it kind of just the same? Not really sure.
I mean, they could make recommendations to the General Assembly as to how custodians can and should be dealing with something like that. Yeah. And it's not always probably something that needs to be legislated. But, we might get to a point where, we do need to, like if the capacity or if the volume and redundancy and the frequency continues to go up with also the anonymity, I think that we're probably going to see like a task force of some kind where they're exploring what's going on in Maryland, what's going on in other states, and what other jurisdictions are doing when it comes to it.
Right, and I don't see those requests going down to the frequency, especially if it can be an AI bot that's just sending those.
I know, right? Yeah. So like PIA Buddy, and then I can't remember. There's 3 other ones that I had come across.
PIA Buddy. So let's shift gears to the custodians. I wrote an article last year actually about cybersecurity threats that are coming to county governments through the request funnel. I think there were some incidents that happened in Virginia. What are the custodians dealing with in terms of their divisions being an entry point for cyber attacks?
This was you're right. This was a big issue in Virginia. I think they had a malware attack that came in through a PIA request. So I guess what you can find is that a PIA request that's being submitted via email could have an attachment to that email that is malware, or even just opening the email could be malware. So now you have the situation where if a custodian is receiving something that, request, and it looks like it could be suspicious, that might not get answered in the appropriate amount of time or at all if they are not opening it because of fear that it's going to expose the system to severe damage. So it just essentially creates a little bit more of a back and forth, I think, between the requester and the custodian, which slows the process down. And another thing is, like, let's say if you have a breach or you have certain protocols in place for cybersecurity, it creates an additional risk if you're sharing that information about, like, let's say the severity of an attack, exactly like what kind of information was vulnerable, what systems do you have in place to avoid things like that. That's the kind of stuff that could lead to more vulnerabilities if it's accessed through a public information access request. And my understanding right now is that there's a decent amount of that stuff that can be redacted. But that question is coming up more and more about what exactly.
Yeah, right. We even get spam emails that, like, I remember spam email that the text was linked and I didn't even realize, like, the text was linked, and they're only getting more sophisticated.
They're tricky. Yep.
Yeah.
I've been embarrassed a few times. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm an elder millennial, so I should be able to catch this stuff, but I don't know.
Yeah. I think too, it's scary that the same tools that are supposed to make governments more transparent are also, there's a way it can make us vulnerable with cyber attacks.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a big issue.
Yeah, well, it erodes the credibility of the process, especially if it means that we're not necessarily responding to things for fear of, it being an attack, or it slows down the process. That's just not good for, good public access to information.
Yeah, absolutely. So taking a turn into public safety for a bit, body-worn cameras are one of the newest and possibly most complicated forms of a public record in recent years. So tell us a little bit about how the broad implementation of body-worn camera use by public safety officials has changed the PIA process.
Well, this came up in Ombudsman Kirshner's update, is that, anytime body-worn camera footage is requested, she's just said it's a big undertaking. But okay, so I'll go back. So when police reform was passed in Maryland, it required the use of body-worn cameras by all county law enforcement officers. So now you have this massive database of video footage that's incredibly sensitive situations, and that's now available for public access requests. And this is something that I said before, she brought up as a perennial problem because it requires this custodian to look at the video multiple times, and then figure out what needs to be redacted, and then either do the redactions themselves or have an outside company do them. And she said, this can be very time consuming and it can be very expensive, particularly for jurisdictions that don't have the more robust technological infrastructure. And I think the other thing that I would add to this is it's not just the custodian that has to review body-worn camera footage. It's oftentimes the officer, it can be the attorneys, and it can be the custodian, and that's reviewing it multiple times. And not just like blurring out somebody's face. I mean, that's one piece of it. It can be, really are trying to catch anything that can be personally identifying. And like, for instance, if an officer pulls up to a house and they have their body-worn camera on, and this is a victim of, let's say, sexual assault, and they're standing in front of their house waiting for the cop, they've got to catch everything. So it's their face, it's potentially birthmarks, it's tattoos, it could be the house number on the side of the house, license plate numbers on the car. It could be if there's cars in the driveway or in front of the house. It could be the street sign out there. It could be numbers on the mailbox. So, and honestly, even if the custodian did get everything out and redacted all of it effectively, you still have AI programs that someone could take that redacted video and then look at just the landscape image in that shot, and it could potentially find that location, and that's something that is kind of scary. But
definitely.
Yeah, and so and that was something that Mako had supported for a long time and advocated for, trying to put guardrails on essentially situations like that where you have a mandatory denial for a victim of a certain type of crime. I think it was also a mandatory denial of the death of an officer and anything that was found to be inconsequential. So like you wouldn't have custodians having to go through and redact hours of video for something that didn't have a detainment on it or didn't have a claim of misconduct. So basically, it would be saving them a little bit of time and energy, and in a lot of ways, not releasing footage of of not even victims, bystanders that were on the video that don't even know they're on the video. So we had supported a provision like that for a long time, and also the Judicial Proceedings Committee has voted unanimously to pass those standards for like 5 years in a row, I want to say. I think it was Judiciary on the House side that's been dragging their feet a little bit more. But in recent, last year, Delegate Williams had a bill that basically would do the same thing that the Judicial Proceedings Committee bill would do. And that was a bill that was spearheaded by Senator Sidner. So I guess it's possible that if Delegate Williams brings that bill back, maybe we'll start to see some of those provisions go in. And that would just make it so it would narrow the scope of the things that have to be released when it comes to body-worn camera footage. If they're, a privacy issue for a victim or an officer, or they're a bunch of inconsequential footage that has nothing on it of substance that hasn't been, flagged for, let's say, misconduct or anything else.
Right. What do you think about the viability of an effort like that?
I think better now because Judicial Proceedings was passing that bill every year unanimously. There was like no debate amongst them that this wasn't something that they thought was good. It was when it would get to Judiciary that I think the conversation started to go a little bit sideways. And so now that there's an advocate over there in Judiciary, Delegate Williams, who can help help some of the other advocates like, myself when I go in there and talk about it, and Senator Sidner, help us educate the committee when it comes to why some of these things would be important, and maybe just put their mind at ease in terms of what it's changing and what it's not changing in terms of what the public has access to. So right. I think more viable now that Judiciary could potentially have a sponsor.
Yeah. Well, soon enough, we're going to be fully immersed in the legislative session and all of the bill reading. Our colleague actually already has a countdown to sine die, but I can't go there. It's painful. But
as long as you can.
Right, yeah. Any last thoughts or things that we didn't get to?
I think for this legislative session coming up, I think it's possible we're going to see a bill that attempts to expand the scope of the compliance board's ability to review denial of a fee waiver. So I think we might see that. I think I don't know if the AG's office is going to bring back any of their bills that were attempting to sort of narrow the scope of some of the documents that could be released if there was pending litigation or if it was an abusive type of request. So I don't know if those are coming back. I kind of doubt it because the conversation didn't go all that well last year. And maybe that's on us, maybe just needing to bring more examples of situations where this has been a problem so they understand that it's actually happening now rather than something hypothetical. So I think we'll see that. And I think I'm hoping, that we'll see Delegate Williams' bill come back that is trying to narrow some of those body-worn camera requests because it would be great. Senator Sidner has been a great advocate of that in the past. And I think having Delegate Williams on the House side would really help get that over the mark. And obviously that would be an important bill for victims for sure. I mean, that was actually a unanimous recommendation that came out of that task force is that the denial of mandatory denial of footage that has a certain type of victim on it. Was a sort of nonpartisan, unanimous recommendation. Okay.
Well, yeah, maybe that would be a good thing for a year like this, an election year, something unanimous. So.
Yeah. So, I feel like session can't come soon enough. Like once I start feeling like we're getting
a hot take,
pulled into that vortex, I'm like, all right, let's just get here and let's get going. Engines are primed.
Well, you can just look at Dom's countdown. All right. Well, I think that's all for us. Just a quick reminder, our 2025 Winter Conference is coming up this December, the 10th through the 12th. The theme of that will be local leadership, lasting impact, shaping what's next. And that's going to be at the Hyatt Regency in Cambridge, Maryland. So there's going to be some really good content. We hope to see you there. And if you enjoy hearing about local politics and policy, be sure to subscribe to the Conduit Street Podcast from whatever device and service platform you choose. You can follow us on X, Facebook, and the Conduit Street blog. On behalf of my colleague, Sarah Sample, this is Karrington Anderson. Goodbye, and we will talk to you soon.